Okay, Josh Addo-Carr has been sacked by the Canterbury Bulldogs. He's had his contract terminated. I've got mixed views on this. I think, yeah, he's been an idiot. He's got drugs in his system, and he's failed a drugs test, a roadside police drugs test. But to his credit, he voluntarily gave the samples. It wasn't as if he refused. He reported himself to the club in the NRL Integrity Unit and was all above board and transparent. He believed he had passed at the time. It transpired he had trace amounts of believed to be cocaine, it could be another drug, in his system, but was deemed fit enough to drive home pending further action. But at the time he believed he had passed. Now he was fully cooperative with the Bulldogs and the NRL Integrity Unit, so he didn't try to hide anything, that we believe, but there were conflicting reports about whether he passed or failed both the A and B samples. It obviously transpired in the end, ultimately he'd failed both. The board have obviously discussed things. There's obviously would have been feedback from coaches and teammates, so Cameron Serraldo and his coaching staff and teammates on their time with Addo-Carr. He's been at the club now a couple of seasons since leaving the Storm. There's got to be more to this than just the failed roadside test. There's had to have been other issues within the club, be it at training or off the field, that have built up for the club to terminate his contract. Now, we know when he was a Storm player during COVID lockdown, there was the infamous time with Latrell Mitchell in the outback, in the bush, with the quad bikes and the firearms and mucking around. And their press release and their excuse was they were like, getting back to their culture and hanging out with the boys, which was, unfortunately, well, I think they had good intentions of just staying together and not and doing just things in the bush and then staying out of Sydney and away from the COVID hotspots. The way they dealt with it wasn't great, and the NRL took a dim view and they got punished. But other than that, I can't think of an incident involving Addo-Carr apart from this recent one and the one with Latrell Mitchell where he's actually misbehaved off the field, which has reached the public domain and got out in the press. So there's got to be things that have happened at the Bulldogs behind closed doors, be it issues in training or turning up late to training or other off-field indiscretions, that like being late for curfew on an away day, for example, back to the hotel. Other things have happened. They might be small things, but other things have clearly happened. I also think, and this is probably more likely, that the NRL is putting pressure on the clubs to clean up player behaviour. Because the NRL is very, very aware of what happened in 2017 and 2018. It's only in the recent 6-7 years ago with all the player misbehaviour off the field involving drugs, alcohol, assault. Very serious criminal charges were brought against Jack DeBellin, for example. Ben Barber, the drink driving conviction of Greg Inglis, which ultimately led to him basically having to forfeit the captaincy of the national side. There were some very, very big high-profile incidents. The Dylan Napa tapes. A lot of things happened. A lot of things. And they were very high profile, and it was almost on a daily basis from the Anzac Day test all the way through to late pre-season in 2018. Just before the season kicked off in 2018, it was almost a daily thing of player misbehaviour involving alcohol, drugs, assault. It was constant. And it was very damaging for the image of the league. So I do think the NRL is putting pressure on clubs to improve player off-field behaviour. Now, another thing that's going on in parallel with what's happened with Addo-Carr is Ezra Mam, his car accident, his failure of a roadside drugs test, and the fact that the vehicle he was driving was unlicensed. He didn't have a licence, it was unregistered, and there was no insurance. And the other vehicle he collided with, which was an Uber, had 2 passengers in, a mother and her young daughter, who both received injuries. And I think the young daughter had a broken leg. So very serious injuries, well, not life-threatening, but still serious enough to require a trip to hospital and a stay in hospital. Now, that I think is far, far more serious than Addo-Carr having trace amounts of narcotics in his system, which are minimal amounts. Even though it came up on a test that there was a trace amount in his system, Ezra Mam, clearly high as a kite, probably on cannabis, ploughs into another car, unlicensed, uninsured, untaxed, right? Far more serious. That can involve a custodial sentence Causing injury by drug driving is quite serious, to be fair. It's reckless driving on it. There's a litany of charges he could be facing should the prosecutor go down that route of we're going to charge you with everything of no licence, no insurance, unregistered vehicle, driving under the influence, the fact that 2 people were injured in the incident. Ezra Mam could be facing some time in prison, and that is no joke. So I do think the NRL has now set a precedent, and the Bulldogs have set a precedent with, when you compare the two, Addo-Carr to Ezra Mam, he was not impaired. He was allowed to drive home safely. He reported himself. This wasn't the police attending. He reported himself to the club the following day and the NRL Integrity Unit and cooperated. That does suggest to me that off the field there's been a litany of minor incidents that have built up, and they're going, we don't want this kind of culture in our club. Addo-Carr is known as a bit of a joker, a bit of a larrikin, but in saying that, we've seen what's happened with Brandon Smith and Cameron Munster at the Storm. Obviously, Brandon Smith ultimately ended up at the Roosters. We've seen what's happened with Reece Walsh when he was a Warrior and he was in Brisbane after the end of the season at a nightclub, was asked to leave the nightclub. He refused to leave the area. The police were called and he got caught with drugs on him. And they were only about 3 days apart. And that was, again, kind of embarrassing for the NRL at the time in 2021. But are we on the same level as 2017, 2018? No. But is there still an element of drugs and alcohol and off-field incidents happening? Yes. Latrell Mitchell earlier this season, for example. The NRL is very, very conscious of the fact they're trying to grow the game in North America and globally with these internationals that they're organising alongside the IRL. And headlines like this come across really badly when you're trying to get new investment, new sponsors, TV deals signed. When you've got high-profile players who are poster boys for the NRL, these are big superstar players. When they're misbehaving on the level they are, it's not good when you're trying to get new sponsors, new investors, new viewers, new fans. There's always been an element of the grog and the gear, should we say, when it comes to pro sport. This is not isolated with Addo-Carr and Ezra Mam. This is not an isolated thing. But it's 2024, not 1984. You can't get away with it these days. It's a 24-hour news cycle. Social media is a thing. It wasn't a thing back in the 80s and 90s. And look at the litany of high-profile players in a variety of leagues, in a variety of sports, who have continued to misbehave off the field, and ultimately it did have an impact on their health, their image, and the image of the sport they participated in. And it's headlines the NRL would rather do without. So I do think the NRL is putting pressure on clubs to clean up player behaviour. We still have the no fault, no stand down policy as well. Ezra Mam could be in a lot of trouble. We have to see how the Broncos and Michael Maguire as the head coach, the new head coach, they deal with Ezra Mam, plus the NRL as well, what kind of punishment he's likely to receive, and whether he does get a criminal conviction out of it and sentenced. Because if that was you or I who did that, that's minimum suspended sentence, a ban from driving for 2 to 4 years, and a lot of community service, and more likely than not you lose your job. So it'll be interesting to see what Ezra Mam does, and the club does, and the NRL, and what happens there. But I do think potentially Addo-Carr, potentially with pressure from the NRL to the Canterbury board, has sort of been made this is what is not acceptable. I think they've made a statement with Addo-Carr, and I do think Ezra Mam will end up in a similar situation in a few weeks' time. I think Ezra Mam will not be a Bronco next season. I think Ezra Mam is going to end up in a similar situation as Addo-Carr. But the Broncos may deal with things differently. Ezra Mam is a younger player. He's not a veteran player like Addo-Carr. Still a superstar. There's no doubt on that. He's an up-and-coming player. There's no doubt on his potential and his talent. But if they have one outcome for Addo-Carr and another for Ezra Mam. That's going to raise some eyebrows of how they've been dealt with differently. But it's not Addo-Carr's first indiscretion off the field, and it's not Ezra Mam's first indiscretion off the field. And Ezra Mam had another incident in Bali on holiday with Reece Walsh. Another player who's had off-field incidents, as I mentioned. It's going to be interesting. I don't think this is going to be the end of the off-season dramas either. I wouldn't be surprised if some other players fall afoul of getting up to no good in the off-season. It always happens with the NRL. There's always some player misbehaviour, but I do think a precedent's been set. I think the NRL are applying pressure to the clubs. And I have some sympathy for Addo-Carr, I do. But at the same time, there's got to be more to this than just the failed roadside drugs test. I think there's been there has to have been multiple infractions off the field with Addo-Carr for the club to go, we're tearing up your contract, bye-bye, you're out the door. So, and there would have been coaching input, there would have been teammate input going. There's things going on here because a player of Addo-Carr standing in the game who's a veteran player, he's a premiership winner, he's one of the best wingers in the game when he's fully fit. He's a very likeable character, actually. He's kind of a likeable character. Some other things have gone on here for the board to terminate his contract, in my opinion. But there we go. The NRL continues to battle player misbehaviour off the field. Addo-Carr is, unfortunately, had to bite the bullet. He's been sacked by the Bulldogs. So there we go. Place your thoughts on Addo-Carr's sacking. Was the Bulldogs board right to terminate his contract? Do you think he's been fairly treated or unfairly treated? And what do you think happens to Ezra Mam at the Broncos? Because is this a precedent now? Is this a precedent for this kind of behaviour? But there we go. Thank you very much for watching. Place your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you like what you hear and see. And also memberships are available as well. And it would be really nice to see some more of you join the members page. So be nice. Be nice to see some more members sign up. But for me, for now, thank you very much for watching. And I'll have some more content for you guys soon.